Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today is the start of Mythic Progress in Battle of Dazar'alor. Now, I released a video last week talking about which specs I thought could end up being the best overall on each fight and why. Well, today I wanted to actually review each fight now that we've seen them a few times and Mythic Progression is underway. Overall, I feel we did a pretty good job with picking and choosing what fights to play Destruction, Affliction, or Demonology on, but some have also favored one spec more than I thought they would. If you're interested in any of the week awards or add-ons you see here, I'll have a link to my Twitch where I'm also streaming all of our progress in the description below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section and I'll be sure to get back to you. For Champion of the Light, I mentioned that I felt Affliction with multiple ID pieces and Absolute Corruption would be the strongest overall spec here, and that has sort of held true. Destruction is also performing very well here thanks to the Flashpoint Azurite trait, which has a very high uptime due to the ads being at high health most of the fight. Personally, I ran 2 ID pieces here for our initial kill, and was very happy with both ID and the AC build as a whole. I feel that we were close enough with Affliction here and Destruction's Flashpoint uptime in the last video to call this fight a success. Krong is a fight where I felt any of the 3 Warlock specs would be a solid choice, and while I do still feel that's sort of true, Destruction has been tearing through Krong recently due to Havoc Cleave on the actual Apetagonizer ads. Rolling Havoc, however, has not seen a whole lot of play here, mainly due to the ads spawning every minute past the first set, which makes Rolling Havoc a pretty poor overall choice. Affliction's also not in a terrible place on Krong, but currently Destruction is the way to go with at least one Flashpoint trait. With it being the dominant spec here currently, I think we missed the mark a bit too much to say Krong was a successful called shot. Jadefire Masters is a boss where both Affliction and Destruction are indeed solid choices. With it being mostly a 2-target boss encounter, you're pretty much always able to get great value out of your Havoc windows, mostly on cooldown. This also means that Rolling Havoc gains a good bit of value here over a fight like Krong, but it's not something that I would want to be all in on at 3 traits. Crashing Chaos, Bursting Flare, and Chaotic Inferno are also solid choices for Destruction here. Affliction has more or less been running a Siphon Life build, mostly consisting of ID pieces, Racking Brilliance, and Sudden Onset to name a few. While it is a great Sudden Onset fight as well as a good ID fight, having 2 permanent targets for your Havoc really pushes Destruction to the forefront here. When it comes to opulence, however, Affliction's single target build running Siphon Life has been the best performing spec I would say so far. Racking Brilliance, ID, Cascading Calamity, and SO are the top performing traits for Affliction currently on opulence. It's worth mentioning that both Destruction and Demonology are not too far behind, however, both running mostly single target traits here as well. Demonology can get a great deal of damage on the ads in Phase 2 with Bilesforge Bombers or Demonic Strength, and the same can be said for Destruction with Cataclysm. Choosing the Opal as your gem of choice also greatly increases our overall damage here, as each spec can cleave onto the ads very easily. While Destruction and Demonology are performing well here, I think this one is close enough to say that we called it correctly as Affliction. Conclave of the Chosen is an interesting fight, as it's one I said I feel both Destruction and Affliction would excel at. It's also another great Destruction fight with the Flashpoint Azurite trait, but also a really solid Affliction fight with Inevitable Demise. Looking through the actual logs, they both seem to be performing very well, with not much separating one parse from another numerically. Conclave is one of those fights that I'm very interested in seeing what becomes the best overall spec when comparing Destruction with triple Flashpoint, and Affliction with double or triple ID later into progression and eventual farm. Either way, the fight still remains one of my favorites so far, and with both specs performing so well, I consider this fight overall a success. Rhastakhan is another fight where both Affliction and Destruction are very close to one another at this point. Most of Affliction's builds are actually running AC and not Siphon Life here, but in similar fashion to previous fights, most of the Destruction parses are running Flashpoint once again. With the Zombie Dust Totems, ads in later Phase 2, and Bonsombi's Phase 3, there are plenty of places to actually proc Flashpoint, which is one of the reasons why we see Destruction performing so well. The totems and ads in Phase 2 and beyond also make for some very strong Havoc targets, but they don't spawn frequently enough to warrant any Rolling Havoc traits here. It's also a decent fight for Inevitable Demise outside of Phase 1 as Affliction. We're pretty much running ID in our single target Azurite set as is, so not much really changes here except Absolute Corruption. Taking the Siphon Life versus Absolute Corruption argument into account, and the success of Destruction here as a whole, I feel that we were close to the mark, but a bit too far off to say we called this one right. Mekkatorque is actually the one fight in the raid that I'm not a huge fan of currently. I feel that all three specs had a good chance of performing very well here, but currently Affliction and Destruction are performing much better than Demonology. Each spec brings with it a special way to generate resources off the ads, but I feel that with there being multiple ads present, Affliction currently does it best. Affliction once again brings ID to the fight as an Azerite trait, and seeing as how the ads take 99% reduced damage and not 100, you can generate ID stacks off them that you can then pump into the actual boss via huge drain life. Destruction once again brings with it the very high Flashpoint uptime and shard generation via the ads. While Demonology can technically run Doom here, you're only really netting an extra soul shard if the ad actually even lives long enough for it to tick, which is a bit underwhelming to say the least. We'll have to see how this all plays out on Mythic though, as the ads deal a significant amount of damage back to you if you hit them on said difficulty. Overall, I'm going to say we were pretty close to the actual mark in this fight, so I'm going to call it a success. Stormball Blockade was easily the hardest boss in the raid week 1, but was also a pretty fun and chaotic fight towards the end. I do expect it to be nerfed or tuned later this week, but we'll have to see what that actually brings. I felt that either Affliction or Destruction would be the best choice here, and it seems that we were pretty close looking at actual logs. Flashpoint makes another appearance as a great trait for Destruction, with there being just so many ads present in Phase 2, even though Phase 1 only has the initial boss health pools and the Siren to proc it. Affliction is also performing relatively well running its single target Siphon Life build, but I feel, especially later into Phase 2, that Destruction is currently the best choice here. Barring there being major tuning to the fight, the last 30% or so spawns ads very quickly, almost to the point where your GCD capped as Affliction while also bringing mediocre damage to the ad spawns. Destruction will more often than not bring a great bit of burst damage to the ads, as well as some very strong boss damage or cleave later on into Phase 2. I do feel that the ads spawn frequently enough to warrant probably one Rolling Havoc piece here, but more than one I feel is probably a bit too much taking Phase 1, early Phase 2 into account. Finally, we have Lady Jaina Probmore, and I'm just going to say now that we did indeed miss the mark here, but I'm actually okay with that. If you look at logs, you will see all three specs performing well, but Demonology is the top performing spec at the moment for Jaina Probmore. Outside of Phase 2's ordinances and some brief ag cleave in Phase 1, the fight's not extremely Affliction friendly if you take into account how Destruction and Demonology can approach the fight. Havoc is strong in the ice blocks in Phase 2 and 3, as well as Jaina's Water Elemental and Blightcaller in the second transition. Demonology also brings a decent bit of stacked AoE cleave, which can be very useful for ice blocks in the later phases, as well as some ag cleave in Phase 1. While the ordinances and ice blocks do make for some pretty high ID stacks, the ice blocks are typically broken pretty quickly, which does not generate a ton of ID stacks, and Affliction's also not the best at pumping a lot of damage quickly into them on demand. The ordinances are also pretty spread out in Phase 2, and while we can make it work, it's a bit of an inconvenience at times. Demonology also brings with it Demonic Tyrant on a 1.5-minute CD that can be used at specific DPS checks, but then it's also up again pretty quickly. I do currently feel, and I'm actually pretty excited to say, that Demonology appears to currently be the best spec for Jaina at the moment, followed by then Destruction and Affliction, which are pretty close to one another, each having their own strengths and weaknesses. So I would say that overall we missed the mark a bit too much on Krong, rhastakhan, and Jaina, but 6 out of 9 called shots is not too bad. It is important to keep in mind that week 1 just finished, and while they did announce the first tuning wave, there's still more likely to come. Out of all the traits that Warlocks have access to in 8.1, honestly I feel that Flashpoint is the one that's most likely to be addressed in an upcoming tuning pass, if there are any. The thing is, looking at most of the fights where Destruction is strong, Flashpoint has a very high uptime and is easily abused. Fights like Champion of the Light, Conclave, rhastakhan, certainly Mekkatorque, and even Stormball Blockade are all fights where you can have a very high uptime, almost 100% on Flashpoint, which then puts you above 40% haste for most of the encounter. You can say the same for Affliction with ID in a sense, but I truly don't think ID is a problem trait in battle. Sure, it does gain a good bit of value on fights where multiple targets are present, but Flashpoint is a whole different ballgame. Personally, I enjoy playing with Flashpoint and don't want to see it gutted or even touched, to be honest, but we have to look at it realistically, and realistically, the trait is currently overperforming. Either way, Battle of Dazar'alor has been an absolute blast, and I cannot wait to get into Mythic progression this week. I wish you all the best of luck this tier in your progress, and hope the recent guides have or will help you all through it. Once again, if you're interested in any of the weak auras or add-ons you've seen here, I'll have a link to my Twitch and Discord in the description where you can acquire them all. If you want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons, as your support really helps. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see y'all in Azeroth. Peace.